tonight's presentation, because we're going to be focusing this time on, labeling our mineral specimens and the most important stuff and all these different things. So we're going to go ahead and start the presentation here. But throughout the presentation, I'm going to have some questions and stuff so we can kind of go back and forth with one another and talk about some of these things. I want to get feedback from people, hear what you think about certain things, because in reality, this is something that we discuss a lot in the community and has a lot of different, perspectives to go on. And that's why I say, before we start, there's a few things that we should know. The first thing is that it is an ongoing discussion. I mean, let's be honest, we could talk about this forever. It could be something that we could spend days on. It's something that message chains are all dedicated to. I mean, the YMC, or the Young Mineral Collectors, have a lot of discussions about this all the time. And you see even the community and clubs talking about this. So it's something that's very important and it's ongoing. But it's also something that has a lot of opinions and personal preference. And that reigns supreme when we talk about doing labels, which I think is the best part about it, right? Is that because there's so much personality behind labels, that's what makes them special. I mean, I don't think we would be talking about this if labels were all the same, if there was so much uniformity. I mean, there's definitely things everyone puts in a label, but again, the personal take on it and the unique take that you have with these labels, as you can see over to the right, there's just a lot of variety, and that's what really makes this worth it. And so tonight, we're just going to focus on highlighting these key takeaways when we're talking about labeling mineral specimens. It's not that everything we say tonight is the law and it's never going to change, because let's be honest, technology is changing. New innovations in the way that we document, the way that we report and record stuff are always changing. So with that, we learn new things. And so this conversation, I don't think will leave our community, and it will be something that people will be talking about probably 20, 30, 50 years from now. So I guess the first thing that we should say to ourselves, and what we should ask to ourselves, is why should we label our minerals, right? Like, why is it important for us to do it? I think first it adds value and legitimacy, right? I mean, a lot of people who go out and buy mineral specimens love to find these older labels with it. They love looking where this mineral has traveled. If it's something that has a label with it, also gives a signal that, yes, I know this collector was very famous for Virginia, and I know this collector collected at this site. So I know that this specimen probably makes sense for this locality. It's also a way to catalog what you have, right? I mean, at the almost the basic point of labeling is it's a cataloging of your collection. It provides provenance, so it gives you this backstory. It tells you the journey that the mineral has taken from its discovery all the way to the current owner. And that's really cool, because the stories are something that I really like. That's why I do this project, is learning more and more about the stories of mineral collecting and the people who collect it and how they came across these deposits. So that's something that's really interesting. And then lastly, I think that it's very important because it helps our kids and family after we pass away. I mean, it's always the statement that we're only the temporary caretakers of our mineral specimens. So when we pass away, or as we get older in life and we think, where is this going to go? When we label and we have documentation, it helps. It helps prevent things from being thrown away. It helps prevent people from not knowing what we have, because I'll talk about this in a second. But if you look at this, this is a microlite, or fluorocalcium microlite, from the Rutherford #2 pegmatite. If someone who didn't know minerals found this, they would look at it and say, that's very ugly, and I'm going to throw it in the trash. But if you have these labels and it's on a nice stand and it's in a nice box, then there's some value there. There's some worth there to that specimen. So I guess I open it up to the first question, which is, does anyone have any other reasons why you think it's important that we document and we label our mineral specimens?
That's the historical side of it as well. I mean, it tells you the history of a site location or a mine or any of that. You need to have that continuity of the story.
Anyone else? Oh, we say we have one that says keep records, but yeah, it's the cataloging, right? It's cataloging, it's building the provenance, it's making that history. And you're right. I mean, it really highlights, okay, what's the journey, what's the history on how things get to that. We see scientific knowledge, right? I mean, who knows where our mineral may end up one day and if it may be used for research. I mean, think about it. I'm looking at all these old specimens, and when I come and find these old specimens, I end up using them for my project, using them in presentations like this. So the more documentation I have, yes, it adds more scientific value to the specimens. I'll talk briefly about this specimen over here real quick. That this piece that I have over here to the right was actually bought at Tucson last year. I was actually, or I guess earlier this year. I can't remember what year it is. It's been so crazy. And this piece was actually bought from someone who was a dealer from France. And you ask yourself, how in the hell does a guy from France get a hold of a specimen from Amelia Courthouse in Amelia County, Virginia? Because if anyone's ever been to Amelia Courthouse, you can like really run past it in 1 minute, and that's it. That's Amelia Courthouse. The area is very famous for its pegmatites, though, and you can see here that there's no documentation that says if it's Rutherford #2. But again, like you say, it's building the story, it's building up the knowledge of a locality. So we could say that, yes, you see this microlite here. We narrow that down to how many pegmatites had microlites. Well, it's on Clevelandite, how many pegmatites had microlites with Clevelandite. And then we can pretty much safely assume that it's from Rutherford. We also see, which I think is fascinating, I would never take it off. Up in the top left or middle left, you see that there's a price tag on it, $3.50. Well, we know that's not from Europe. You know, it's $1, right? So we see that the specimen was collected, it was sold off, it transferred hands, who knows how many times, made its way to France, probably from Tucson or another show, and then years later makes its way back to my collection, which is kind of the cool part, right? That's the story. And that's what you said. We also see another answer here that says it connects you more tightly with your collection. And I think that's a great response, because we can tell these stories, we can go back and look at our labels, and we can remember these things, because as we get older in life, we may forget, right? So we can remember these stories and it will connect us. So let's move on here to why do most people not label? This is kind of, you know, this broader discussion of why do people not label? And I want to specify that if you don't label your minerals, it's not like I'm going to come, you know, to your house with pitchfork and torches and say, you need to start labeling your minerals. But there's a lot of reasons people don't. One is time consuming. I think everyone who labels knows it's very time consuming to do so. It requires persistence. You have to continue to maintain the collection. You have to continue to come back and keep it updated. And there's some extra cost, which for mineral mounting is a little bit more. You know, acrylics are a lot, or getting fancy bases, but labeling still has some extra cost. If you're not an avid collector and you're just an enthusiast that loves to go to your local rock club, you know, and dig on field trips, you may never really see a need to label your specimens. You're never that into it. So some people just don't. Is there anyone else that they think of some reasons maybe why you don't label, or why you haven't labeled, or why you think other people maybe that don't label mineral specimens?
I think in my case, it just gets away from me.
Yeah, it gets overwhelming when you start collecting a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking for myself, just sheer laziness.
Well, I'm going to talk at the end here something that I always call the field collector's dilemma. And, you know, I was a field collector when I first started doing everything, and I preferred that. I mean, I'm not someone who goes out and buys a lot of minerals. That's just not who I am. I love to be the person who dug my own specimens. But when you go out and dig, a lot of us who do the field collecting realize you can come home with maybe 100 pieces of minerals and rocks in a day. So when you're field collecting a lot, it gets almost very overwhelming. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. Any other reasons why people maybe don't label?
Well, if they're collecting for decoration, things that catch their eye rather than any scientific, where
Exactly.
it's from and things like that.
Exactly. So I think that's why you go out to a lot of the shops and you see these amethyst cathedrals and your smaller amethyst geodes and stuff like that, or your crystals from quartz crystals from Arkansas. A lot of them don't have labels when you buy them, right? They just have the price tag.
Right.
So the fancier your minerals get, the more information they end up having, which kind of makes sense, right? And you would say to yourself, do we need to have all the geodes from Brazil labeled? You know, maybe not. So yeah, that's definitely something that does come up a lot. Any other reasons maybe?
Well, for Healy,
Well,
Healy Feely, but I guess for like people use them for power crystals and things like that. Come up with
Yeah.
different terms for them and things like that. They don't really care about where they're from and all that. But this is a milky. This is So
Yeah, so there's a lot of different, right? There's a lot of reasons that
like
people
that.
collect minerals, and there's a lot of different focuses on why people do these things. So yeah, those are some great reasons as to why people may not label. And I think that, one thing that I'm very passionate about, and I think one of the reasons that I want to do this and maybe make even additional videos or very short, 3-minute, 5-minute videos about labeling specimens is because I think the more people that find it easier to label, the better our entire hobby will be.
Yep.
Because when you think about it, 90%, I won't say 90%, but a very large majority of people who collect minerals are not avid, hardcore mineral collectors, right? They're people who go to their local rock clubs and such. And so you're going to find more people that don't label than do label. So the more people that we can get labeling, the easier that we can make it, the more accessible we can make it. I think it's only going to benefit our community.
Well, you got one other reason too, is you go out and you collect a lot of minerals on the field, and it ends up that you may not know what everything is.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, I've collected a number of things from auctions and estate sales.
Mhm.
Sometimes you get a box of minerals and you get a box of labels. So everything is all mismatched.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we're going to talk about like what should go on a mineral label. And, a lot of people think that species, which of course, what is the mineral, is very important. And it is very important. Like that's something you definitely want to have. But when you think about it, location is also very important because you can always identify it at a later date or have someone who could help you identify it. But the locality, if you're missing that, it may be difficult to figure that out. But yeah, that's definitely another good reason. And then, of course, I always laugh because as I go out and I meet with people, there's some common statements I always hear, which is, I know my minerals. I know my collection. I'm not going to forget. I know everything that I've collected and everything in my collection. And that could be true, but sometimes we do forget. That's what museums do. I've heard that before. That's something that comes up, that's, someone else can do it. Or when I die, someone will take my collection and they'll document it. Well, I think all the museums or people who work with museums could appreciate having labels on specimens already. It saves a lot of time. And, sometimes they don't make it to a museum. I mean, again, if your kids find a box of rocks and they don't know what it is, it may never actually make it out to the museum.
Right.
And then lastly, we always hear, which again is the kind of lazy argument, or not calling someone lazy, but that argument of, I will eventually, there's a lot on my plate. And let's be honest, for a lot of people, mineral collecting is a hobby. It's something that they do that's enjoyable when they have time to do it. So they don't think about mounting and sitting down for hours at a time, documenting and doing all these different things. And for collectors like us, that can be a little bit annoying at times. We say, well, you need a label, but some people, that's just not where their interest is. And that's what we were talking about, why most people don't label. They may have other reasons as why they collect minerals. So what information goes on a label? So this is one of my earlier labels. And, I'm reorganizing and trying to redesign the label now, but you can see here that I have a couple key things. I have the species, or what is, what I'm actually looking at there. The locality, I have, some states there to kind of give it a little bit of uniqueness. I have my name. It's my private Virginia collection. I actually have backs. Some people don't do backs, but I have a number, comments, and acquisition. But if we had to say, what are the most important things that we should put for a label, I would say locality, species, and provenance. Anything about, who it came from previously or different things like that. Now, we know that we can put other different things, right? Extra stuff like the dimensions. And that's becoming really important now because of the internet. Over the last 15 years, people are starting to buy minerals online. Look at COVID-19. People are out there all the time buying and selling because we don't have the rock shows. We don't have these rock swaps. So dimensions become important because you can always take these beautiful pictures now, but never really get the size reference. Chemical formula. Some people put chemical formulas on the front. That comes back to the scientific. Price, what did you pay for it, what you value. Date of acquisition, and I have that on mine. Collection ID, so different things like that. And then what are some other things that people may think that would be useful, or what they put on their mineral labels that may not be here?
Well, you mentioned dimensions. One thing that I don't think I've ever seen, but you see a lot with fossils, not so much minerals, is a scale bar that is to scale. So if you want to take a picture of your specimen with the label,
Yeah.
you don't have to have a ruler next to it. There's no question as to how big it is. Just simply include a 1 centimeter bar or something in that label somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think that because we'll talk about too, like cataloging and kind of going back to, photographing our specimens like that. We can say we'll label our specimens, and maybe we should be labeling and photographing at the same time, which can be difficult if we don't have, high quality equipment or such, but even a reference photograph. But yeah, having that. But how many people, I can't even say for myself, has a centimeter reference cube?
Yeah, I've never seen it.
Also, typically, like, if you're doing a lot of field collecting, you want to do two types of labeling. You want to do a field label. So when you've got that bucket of quartz, whatever you're carrying down the mountain, you make a note, where you are, what day it is, who you're with, what you collected, and you throw that in the bucket with it. So when you get down and you do your cleaning and all that, you have all the notes to remind you who you were with, where you were, was on the north face or the south face of the mountain, things like that.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of times if you're digging in a mine, collectors will pay a lot extra if it says something like, the whatever pocket in the lower tunnel, things like that, that are a little more specific than just, this mine or this mountain. If you have a little, like south face, north face, above the creek, things like that, sometimes if that's in your comments.
And that kind of comes back around to cataloging too, right?
Like, it's not just like it's some weird mine, but it's like a specific tunnel or something like that as well. If you're selling, that can add a lot of value.
Sure. Yeah, especially because if you're out field collecting a lot, you may never, like you said, you may have to put them in a bucket or put them in a flat and come back to them at a later date.
Right. And that happens quite a bit.
We also see, someone said that we can include any information about designating whether a specimen belongs to a suite, like a specific section in their collection. And that they've also seen people include Min ID numbers from MinDat. And we'll actually talk a little bit about Min ID just briefly. But yeah, those definitely are things that would be included on this. And, maybe jumping the gun here myself, but, when it comes to cataloging stuff too, there's always the question, how little information do you want to put on your label? How much information do you want to put on your label versus should I just put a reference number and then have everything else in my catalog so that my label just has it? And again, that's a personal preference thing. And I guess that begs the question, is there such a thing as too much information on a label? Does anyone have anything that they think about that? Do you think there would be such thing as too much information?
I think for aesthetic purposes, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, aesthetically, we don't want to put too much, right? I, for myself, make a back. Some people don't want a back. So, it depends on the purpose. It depends on how you're displaying it. And we'll talk about that. But I do have a joke here, and I want Alex Vinsky to kind of talk about it himself. But there may be times where you do put a little too much on a label.
Yeah, so this is an example of too much information on a label for a joke piece. Just putting that out there. This is not how I usually set up my labels.
That's cool.
So anyway, the story behind this is that I got a pebble from my driveway. I pretend it's this fantastic world-class piece. And so as a joke, we just wanted to see how much information we could squeeze onto this label, just to see what we could put. So obviously you see we have a super long, super detailed locality. We have so much information down below there. And the information below the locality, that's size like 2.9 font on like a 3-inch wide label.
Wow.
So again, that's too much information, but it was just made as a joke.
I love it.
Well, you see, we went all the way from driveway mine to the multiverse, and I just want to highlight here that this specimen is pretty popular within the YMC group. It's from Virginia, so hey, look, Virginia specimen getting some highlights.
If I had that at Tucson with this label, I could sell it for about $20, $25.
It was displayed in Tucson this year in one of our exhibit
The
cases.
label, they'd be so impressed, they pay you the money because, oh, it must be great because look at how detailed the label is.
Thomas?
They get a little obsessive in Tucson.
Yeah, but this is just kind of a joke thing, but it is something where, again, you can't put too much on a, but let's be honest here, aesthetically, this looks freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks pretty good. I mean, the design is pretty great, but in reality, yeah, you know, there can be too much. So again, that's where your cataloging comes into play, right? So cataloging is also another reason why they go hand in hand.
Right. There's a difference because, like, for instance, I got a bunch of from Ellison collection stuff, and we got this at auction, and there were 5 of us and split this thing up, but the labels were 3.5 by 5 card size labels. And luckily the person had put them in the bottom of the box with the rocks. But for my sake, I took the basic information and put that on the bottom of the label that I created, but I have a catalog that has the larger label in it.
Yeah.
The other thing is the old handwritten ones are kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
You notice from your initial slide that they fade. And the other thing is a lot of the younger folk coming in can't read that secret code called script anymore. So
Cursive.
Because so you give them if you have something cursive, half the kids coming in when we're at the show, they couldn't read the label because it was in code.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely an entire sub hobby of getting to labels, but I guess that comes to the next thing, which is label sizes, right?
Yeah.
So some, like many things in life, they come in many shapes and sizes. And, how big should your label be? How small should your label be? Do you want a different size? Do you want just one size? In reality, that's a personal preference, right? So there's not this standard label size. That may be, yes, there's specific sizes for boxes and cases and different things like that. But some people just prefer to have one for printing purposes. Here is actually some very simple labels that I've been helping with Andy's collection for Virginia, trying to figure out how we want to have different sizes here. We have this very large label to the left side, which is like a 3 by 4 inches. And then we have some smaller varieties. And of course, your micro labels and your thumbnail labels are going to be very different than these typical labels. But it depends on the boxes you have. Some people want to just have labels that match their specimen sizes. And then if you store it a certain way, if you display it a certain way and you organize your collection, then you may have different label sizes, but they come in all shapes and sizes. And that's, again, some of the beauty of it is that they're just so unique. How many people, when they do labels, or people that do label, do you have different sizes? Or do you normally just go with one size? I mean, what's the average, opinion on how that type of thing works? I mean, does people see that it's better to have multiple sizes, or better just to stick with one?
For my collection, I just have one size for everything. It's about like 3 inches across, 1.5 inches tall. And that works for me, I found. I don't really care too much about having like a size to put in one of those perky boxes, a size for larger pieces. So I just do the one size.
I see a lot of sizes change once you get down to thumbnails, I guess, because they're putting them in boxes, different boxes.
Well, also it depends, because some people like to display the labels in front of their specimen, separate from in which case the size you had is perfect. But also a lot of people like to glue them to the stand so that it doesn't get lost from the piece, in which case you have to, adapt your card to whatever's going to fit on that stand.
Yeah.
That's where I catalog.
Yeah, I'm a fan of a few standard sizes. So big for whatever specimens you need to have a lot of information, or if they're displayed openly, and then small or maybe a medium. But I like the standard look, because I've seen collections where it's all different labels, all different sizes in it. I don't really like the way that looks.
Yeah.
Personally.
Well, because of the way that we were doing our stands originally, most of my labels are separate, but then I have basically like glass sands and then the information on the bottom, but I would keep the label, the official label for it, in my catalog.
Yeah.
Which is good as long as my catalog makes it with the collection when I correct.
We'll talk about that. Yeah, what happens if you lose your specimen, your labels? Because I've done that before. So here's an example of like a thumbnail box or just, a smaller specimen here. And this is actually from the George Reimer collection. And George Reimer, oh my gosh, his handwriting was fantastic. I mean, fantastic. And he would write so small on the back of the boxes and everything. And it looked really well. I can say that I couldn't do that. My handwriting would be awful, which in today's world, we can always print. We can always, type out stuff. But this is just an example of some Babingtonite, pre-night, and still bite. And you can see that he thought maybe there was another mineral there. But yeah, so this is an example of like some very small labels on the back when you get down to kind of some of the smaller sizes. And then this is actually something I just acquired recently. This is a microlite from the Rutherford number 2. As you can see up at the top, let's go back. As you can see at the top right, it's from Mueller County. So it should be Amelia, but we see it's in a small box. It has a lot of different numbers. You see T144, with M12, which I guess is microlite, possibly number 12. You see it has a painted number. We'll talk a little bit about Lifesaver labels and different things like that. And then it has a bottom. I thought it was so fascinating that I've never seen specific gravity and hardness put on a label before. So I'm not quite sure what the purpose was for this. Maybe this person had a specific suite, or this was a research collection or something. But we also see here, which is kind of cool, that it was sold in 1978 at Tucson, which would make sense some prime time for collecting at Rutherford for $8. And unfortunately, I have a red arrow there if you can't tell. The unfortunate situation happened where the person who was labeling this last put their label and glued it or taped it, which it was glued in a way, on top of the old original label.
Oh, no.
No.
I can't see what's underneath it. I can see some very faint text that says it's from Amelia, Virginia, Rutherford number 2, but I don't get any more information than that. So I'm going to see if I can, get water and maybe it will come off or something. But yeah, that definitely happened. We actually are about to get on the database for the mineral stuff too. So we'll actually talk about that in a second.
Good.
I saw there was a question about database stuff.
Excel crashes if you make it too big.
Yeah. So I guess the next thing is like sales versus display. So this is just kind of an example that I have here for one of my specimens. I actually bought it from Casper originally. So here's the original label. I also have my display label and then my personal collection label. So I have like 3 different labels that go with this. The one on the left was actually going to be used for the Montgomery County display, which unfortunately did not happen. And then the one on the upper right is kind of what I use in my collection, or what I did anyways. But again, when we talk about sales versus collection versus display, privacy is very important to mineral collectors, especially when you start talking high dollars. Not everybody wants you to know how much they paid for that specimen. So sometimes you won't see the price on the front. That's another reason why people kind of differentiate their collection labels versus their display labels. They may put the ID, but they don't want to show all that information because it may be some private stuff that they want to keep on their catalog, but not put into their, display label. People also differentiate those, just again, like I said, for the hiding the pricing. And if you're doing sales, one thing that people always recommend is maybe putting little white tags or little white things on the, and we'll see some labels at the end here that you can remove easily. And I like that because if you use good cardstock, you can always take it off pretty well. If you use kind of a very soft material, it may rip off, the top. But George Reimer in his, boxes and his labels, he had them so that I could really take them off really well with the razor blade and then put them on the back, which is really nice. And so, the big question here is, what do you normally do with your labels when you're not putting them on display? Because we don't want to sit there with the specimen and have 5 labels underneath, right? You don't want to see all that stuff underneath your label. So where do your original labels go in your collections when they're on display? Does anyone have any ways that they do that people may find interesting?
So I've got a little notebook here that just holds like 300.
Hold on, Alex. I'm going to share your screen real quick.
Okay. I have this little notebook here that I got on Amazon. It holds like 300 labels back to front. So I haven't put anything in here yet because I'm still going through and organizing my collection. But my plan was just to put like my labels and then any other previous labels with it in here, and then I would have a number that can match up with my label here, so I can go find it in the collection.
What size are the slots? Would they hold a 3x5 card?
I think so. It's a business card. They should. It's a business card holder.
Okay.
But it's nice because each one of these pages have slots on the back and front. So if I want to put in, I can put in everything for one piece on one side and then flip it over and have a new slot for another piece. I don't have to like put in one piece facing this way and one piece facing that way, but they're in the same slot.
I always thought about, again, the baseball, like a baseball card, because I used to collect baseball cards as well, and always thought that was a great way, which is the same concept here. But I
Yeah.
like the way he has it because it's a nice line and it's not so crowded.
Yeah, I was going to say there's also binders for different kinds of cards, baseball cards, magic cards. It could be different sizes, and coins as well, if your labels are square, for example. So you can improvise if you have different shapes and sizes to your labels.
I didn't think about the coins. That's really, yeah, because you do put those coins in those white kind of cardboard with that little, I guess.
Yeah, the 2x2s,
Yeah.
standard.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Good idea.
Oh, and dollar bills.
Yeah, you're a coin guy. I have no clue about any of the any of the coin stuff. But yeah, but I think that to me is the way that a lot of labels end up getting misplaced, is when they're not on display. And I found that for myself, I had went through my collection one time, cataloged everything. It was perfect. It was nice. I was happy with it. And then I said, well, I'm going to put these labels, somewhere. And oh boy, that didn't turn out too great. And I was like, oh gosh, and I didn't have numbers on them and stuff. You live and you learn, I guess, right? But that's a big thing. What happens when they're not on display? So those are two great ways of doing it. I think it's probably the best way of trying to get it down there. So that way you put them all in the same one. And Alex, do you have a copy, or how do you do you have another label in there as well, or just your number?
So I have my label with my number. It's like if you go back to the Pebble slide.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to go all the way back.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So if you see up in the top left, I have a number there. So that's my number for the piece in the collection. And then I have, when I put that in this binder here, I'll have them all consecutive from number 1 to number 200 and whatever I'm up to now. And then I'll have that number I'll either have another label, a smaller label in the case with the piece, or I'll put the number on the piece itself, which we'll talk about later. And then so that's how I match up what labels stay with which specimen.
Is the 0.18 on there part of the joke, or is there a purpose to that?
No, so that's not part of the joke. That's how I do my numbering. So for that one, it's number 176 when I cataloged it. And I got it in 2018.
Okay.
So it's the collection, it's my collection number and then the year I got it.
You're acquired, right?
Yeah.
Huh, like that.
So then there's always the fancy bases. Like if you spend a lot of money on minerals and you have some of these high value specimens, it's probably worth complementing it with a very nice base. So we talked about acrylic bases, and again, we're not going to get off on the tangent of mounting and the bases and all that, because we could talk about that in an entire other conversation. But there's ways that you can buy these really nice acrylic stands. They normally have this laser etched printing on the front, and that in a way acts as a label. Like you could put a number on the bottom, and then you could have this, and then all those original labels could be in your collection. But this is one way that a lot of people do this. I mean, at Tucson, there's always a lot of different people and vendors out there that actually offer this. So there's a lot of different places you can do it. And this is kind of the most aesthetic way of doing your specimens. but this has never, ever, and I don't think will ever, remove the need or the desire for the paper labels. I think that's going to be here for a long time. I mean, people really love those really old labels. So even though you have these acrylic bases, you still have those original labels. Alex, maybe you can speak better on like who maybe does some of that.
Yeah, there's a wide range of people in the hobby who have the capabilities to do that. I know that the Arkenstone has people who do it. There's the Sunnywood collection. There's Blake Barnett does those, and this piece was done at Stone Throne. And
But like you said,
yeah,
that there's always limited writing there.
Yeah, it's really limited. Even across all of those people, you can really only have 2 to 4 lines usually of places like of engraved text, unless you get like a super custom base with a whole lot more info. But then your acrylic's gonna be like this thick, and who wants like a 2-inch thick acrylic base?
What are the normal thicknesses for these? Just 1 inch?
I believe so, yeah.
But yeah, but these are the way, this is like the really fancy way of doing it. But again, this is where we come back to that question that we had at the beginning is like, you know, there's so many ways of labeling. There's so many ways of actually preserving it. And I was going to ask a question and I didn't think about it because, you know, I said, well, maybe not. But, you know, would a napkin work as a mineral label? I mean, what do people think about that?
I mean, if you can write down information.
Yeah. So I think so, right? I think that's the point, right? That any type of labeling, if it's a scrap piece of paper, if it's something, that's better than nothing. So I think if we can maybe sometimes, even for people who are not always these pro collectors, understand that having who you collected with, the date, and you know what it is and where it's from, even if you don't know what it is, putting where it's from, that may at least do for now. And I know a lot of collections that I've looked through and old collections where the only thing I had were some scraps, and that's the only thing I had to go off of. But that was better than nothing, and I kept those scraps. I have this paper from Willis Mountain, which, you know, is a very popular spot, and clubs still go there to dig about once a year. I have a lot of people there. And at Willis Mountain, there's so many different types of minerals, and there was this person who was doing all this documentation, and they wrote all these notes and all these things, and it got water damaged. So the whole paper was all messy and everything, and I laminated it. I kept it because I said, I'm not going to get rid of this because, you know, this is information that I can look under a microscope or figure out the words and type it up myself. So I kept that because it worked, and it was a label. It was a way of a process of documenting a discovery. And that's the most important thing. So I think that counts. So it doesn't have to be so fancy like this, but it can be something simple. So this is where we were all going. We were talking about cataloging, right? And I think that that's a completely different beast, right? You can have an entire discussion about cataloging mineral specimens. How do you catalog, so on and so forth. But I think the mindset of cataloging should be with labeling is very rational. And I think that we should encourage folks to catalog and label at the same time. I think that's very easy now since we have all this technology that we can easily, you know, catalog at the same time. We can have our computer and do our labeling at the same time. But in a perfect world, you want to do these as soon as you get them, right? Like you want to make sure when you get new acquisitions, you go ahead and document and catalog and make all the necessary changes. In reality, you know, we talked about if you're out collecting and you're doing a lot of different stuff, you may not do it today. It may be another week. It may be another month before you get back. I mean, people have different lives. It's not just about minerals. So there's a lot of different things that could come up. But in a perfect world, you would do it at the same time. Creating ID numbers for each specimen can give them that unique number. And we were talking about that. Alex was talking about the way that he does it. And you can also use Min ID, which gives these very specific and only one ID for minerals that you see on MinDat. So these specimens that are on MinDat have a Min ID. And so giving these specimens specific numbers and making sure that stays with that specimen is going to be very important, and is a way to kind of document and catalog your specimens. This is actually a really nice piece from Rockbridge. And you can see here, there's all these different numbers on it. It's come like, 5280. We see this is from the Pennsylvania Academy of Natural Sciences collection. We see there's an original label here from Miss Hugh Davids. And so this is a really nice piece. It has all this documentation, a really nice specimen, and it adds that value because you have those original labels. And that's really, really cool.
Is that a Cal Graver label?
I'm sorry?
Is that one of Cal's labels?
That is.
Yeah.
Yes.
I used to work for him.
Yeah, like especially if you sell and you're getting into selling the higher end pieces, like you'll notice we can't see the name or anything on that label, but that's immediately recognizable as a Cal Graver.
Exactly. And that's the cool part. That's the cool part about these labels, is that you can almost recognize them without ever having to see the name on it.
That's another reason to label your collections, people.
Yeah. And so when we get to the end here, we're going to have a slideshow of a lot of these different labels, and we'll see that there's all these different collectors from Virginia and from places that we know, even if we just saw the back of their label, even the color. Yeah. I could tell you some labels just because of the color. And that's just so fascinating. So the question that comes up next is, how do people catalog? And we're going to just move on because I know that people were asking this already. And we talked about Google Sheets. I think, in my opinion, that's what I use. That's what other people use, is the best way to do it because it's free. It's a very easy to use system. And for those of us, especially, I guess, in my age group, we're always having a Gmail account, right? So it's something that comes with it, and it's very easy to use, and it keeps it on the storage. It keeps it on the cloud. So you can add all these different fields, and you can even add photographs. This is actually Matt McGill's collection and his catalog on Gmail, which is crazy to think that this is something from Google Sheets. So these are two collections here. This is Alex's collection. Alex, do you want to talk about maybe some of the ways that you did that up at the top?
Yeah. So my catalog's up top, Matt's is below. They're kind of similar, but I go with my collection number, my size, the species, the formulas. Still like having the formulas on my label. That's just one of my personal preferences. And then it got cut off here, but I have the locality, and then I have who I acquired it from, what I bought it for, what I value it, and then any other notes that I have about the piece. And then since this picture, I've also added images as well.
Have you had any problem with file size?
No, it's just all in Google Sheets. It hasn't slowed down at all like Excel would.
Okay, yeah, because Excel, I had most of my stuff in Excel at one point and it just crashed and ate it.
Yeah, especially with all the images I have now, Excel would be exceedingly slow. And so I've just always used Google Sheets because one, it automatically saves it. I can access it on my phone. I can go to any computer anywhere, log into my Google account, get back to this.
Nice.
So that's why I've liked it and used it a lot.
Because you always have it in your hand, like you said. You can always literally, you're out with some friends and someone says, "Hey, where's this specimen from this?" You can just pull it up right then there.
Right.
You can just highlight whichever one you want to print a label from that, or
yeah. So so Matt and I work with my labels, and when I get a piece, when I buy a piece, I immediately put it onto my spreadsheet here. So I give it the next number. I give it the year. If I know the size, I put that in. But if I don't, I size it. I take the size when I get it, and so I just can easily pop in details when I need.
I'm not familiar with Google Sheets. Is there a way to download this onto your computer or onto an external drive to make a backup of this? Because, the cloud may not last forever.
So yeah, you can always download it as like an Excel file and stuff like that. You can always, I think that's probably why it doesn't get laggy, Alex, right? Is that since it's always updating, it's on the Google Cloud, it's actually not seen as like this long data file. So you don't actually have to worry like you do with Excel.
Right. Yeah, there's multiple ways to download it. Actually, when I work with Matt to make the labels, we download my newest pieces as a CSV, text only, and then that can be merged into the label, and it just auto-populates our label that way.
Can you also talk about how to add photographs to the Google Sheets document?
Yeah. So I just have a column like Matt does with the image. And you just go, you select the box you want to put an image in, and you click insert image in cell, and then you can just upload whatever image, and it puts it right in there like that.
Is there a field for notes?
Yes.
Yeah, I have like
Yeah, I
5 or
couldn't
6
put
more
everything on
fields.
here. I'm sorry. I apologize, Alex and Matt. I couldn't fit it all there.
Yeah, no, but I have notes about like 4 or 5 fields down.
And there's no limit to the columns, right?
No, you can just
It's
keep
just
going
like
for
Excel.
however long you want.
Yeah, it should
like
be.
Excel, you can do anything. I mean, this technically is not a. It works like Excel. It's just very different, right? You know, it's. I see Matt said it at the same time. Yeah, it's virtually the same as Excel, and it's the way that you do everything that you would on Excel. You do similar to here. Alex, can you can't put images in Excel, can you?
No.
I don't think you can. Yeah. So this is
Yes,
a
you
feature that I
can.
think makes it. You can.
Yeah, you can put images in Excel, same way, just insert them in a cell.
Yeah, the newest version should
The
have
newest
a
version you can.
way for you to
Okay.
do that.
Can you import a CSV into this program? So if you take your old Excel catalog and import it into this?
Pretty sure you're able to.
I
Okay.
think you could.
I imagine so. It sounds like it's designed to be compatible with Excel.
I
So
think
free software isn't as strong on the imports.
I like this because I mean, you know, I think that's another thing too. Like with our universities and people who are younger, they're going to school and doing all these different things. Most of us have a Gmail account. I mean, that's pretty much. I can't think of many of my friends that have a Yahoo or another type of an account. So we already have this. You know, we use this in school a lot, and so you use it for a lot of different things. But I mean, it's there. It's on the cloud. And I did say there, you know, Alex, too, that I always with my collection one keep it updated on an external drive as well, just to be safe. So I always have the external drive. I have this Google Doc, but it is so handy to pull it up on your phone. It's almost as if you had a database. And there's a lot of different programs too, right? I mean, there's some paid mineral collection sites. There's some free sites like Geology 365 has some features that we've talked about previously that you can use to catalog. But this is one of those that's quick. And for people that are very used to Gmail, that are very used to Excel, I think it's a great alternative. And I would say that if you use Excel, check this out because it's going to work and operate a lot better.
It's basically the same as Excel. There's a few things that you won't be able to do on Google Sheets that you can do on Excel, but that's like the really super powerful stuff, which you're not really going to need for this anyway. But I started using it because of the simplicity and just like if I was at a mineral show and I bought a rock, I would take that, walk off to the side, and then immediately put in the information right there when I was thinking of it.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to do that, and that's how I've been able to keep up.
Well, the problem is I'm going to do that, look it up, and say, "Oh, dang!" And my wife's going to say, "You already have 6 of those, and won't let me get the 7th one."
Yeah, well, that's another thing. Well, that's the thing too that I like about Google Sheets because I'm actually working with Andy on his collection now, and we're going and doing a Google Sheets document. And so even though I'm far away, you know, I can at least help him. So there's ways that, you know, y'all both can have access into that collection with your different Gmail accounts and can work into that. So there's a lot of collaborative features. There's a lot of different features that allow you to instantly see those changes. And that's another reason why a lot of students and schools use like Google Sheets and Google Docs and all that, because when you collaborate, you can see all that typing and changing and comments at the same time. So there's a lot of great features, you know, built into this that's just more than cataloging as well.
Like this, because the ones you're not sure about, you can populate the fields that you do know about and then share it with somebody who also knows Virginia minerals. And they can say, oh, of course, that's from and then you can, you know, they can see the picture and give you feedback to fill in the rest of what you need.
It is good to have redundancy though. So like I have my catalog here on Google Sheets. I have it downloaded on a hard drive. I have I made a website where I also have pictures of my collection that also kind of counts as a backup catalog. And then, like Matt said, there's also a cataloging feature on Mindat, which is a little clunky at times, but it works. And like what Thomas said with Geology 365, that's another free cataloging program.
And I think you can actually make custom labels on Geology 365 as well.
Yeah, I think so.
And I will say here that Matt had mentioned earlier and wanted me to mention that on his, which is the one in the lower right corner, that he also has a 5-star rating system. So you actually have some sort of rating, you know, how do I rate this specimen? Also saying, is this a display or a reference specimen? Because even like for people like myself who collect localities, some of my specimens aren't on display. They're just really neat because they talk a lot about a locality, but I want to put them on display. So there's also tabs that you can add about, is this reference or not?
Yeah, I have a zillion pieces from Rogerly that are reference pieces, not display pieces.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
We were going through too, and you know, when we talk about this in a second, but you know, it can get overwhelming if you, especially if you have a lot of specimens already. So one of the things that Andy and I did is we just tried to start with those best of the best first, then go second tier, then go third tier, and work our way from the top down. Because if you start going with all the references and you start going all this, it can get very overwhelming at first if you have a lot. But again, cataloging is a completely different beast, and we could probably have and we should probably an entire conversation about that as well. Yeah. So the question we had earlier, what if I lost my specimens? I mean, what if I lost my labels, my specimen labels? If you lose your specimens, you're out of luck. Can't help you there. But so the question is, you know, what happens if we misplace our specimens? Would you know the correct mineral that goes with it? You know, how can we prevent this from happening? Is the kind of a question that always pops up because, again, like myself, been in the situation where I had everything, but I was doing a showcase somewhere, or I was moving houses because I'm in college, and here you go, my labels are now all messed up. And I had to have a hard lesson there because what do I do? And so one solution that's always been proposed, and I think is the best way to do it, is having a Lifesaver label. So Lifesaver labels are something that the rock courier, for those of you that are very familiar with Mendat, should know him. He's done a lot of work and been very, very, you know, famous in the field of mineral collecting. And this is the best way that I think, and one of the ways we were talking about, how do we make sure that this information doesn't get lost, is to create these Lifesaver labels. There's also a great article on Mendat that we'll put into the chat there for you to go read, because he does a lot of, you know, great talking points about these Lifesaver labels and just labeling in general. It's definitely worth a read. So what is it? Well, it's a small cutout label that's glued onto the specimen that includes some information if you want it, as well as a number. So when we went back to our previous specimens, we saw there's a lot of cataloging numbers. You see that with museum pieces, right? But these Lifesaver labels are small, about the size of a Lifesaver. And you put it, you glue it on the back. You can even, you know, use some white enamel. Some people use that. With a felt pen, a very small felt pen, number it, and then cover it with nail polish so that it doesn't fade away. And what this has done is it's actually made it so that even if your labels get misplaced, as long as you have a number on your label and you have that number on your mineral specimen in your catalog, there's no chance that you're going to mess those things up. I mean, unless something really bad happens. And again, if you've lost your specimen. But this is probably the best way. Is there anyone here that actually does this type of Lifesaver labeling?
I don't have.
I might.
Go ahead.
I might. I've been debating it, but I haven't done anything yet.
This is an extra step, right?
One of the things about the painting labels on, I used to do the white enamel. Well, no, I used to do various types of paint or whiteout or whatever and rapidograph, but a friend suggested typing in as fine type as font as you can get, and then using Elmer's glue because you can dissolve it.
Yeah.
And then doing glue over the top of that. So that's what I've been doing.
I think back in the days, you probably didn't have all that fine type, right? So I think, yeah, that's probably even the better way.
I can write really fine. It's actually easier to read with the font.
Well, I was going to say a comment about that too is if you have a program, a vector program like Illustrator, you can type font on there and then shrink it or expand it to whatever size you want on your printouts. You don't have to necessarily be constrained by points or whatever the size of your font is.
I don't have Illustrator, but yeah.
There's been, I know that when I've done mineral cleaning, that kind of thing, Elmer's glue is what I would recommend. It's a very big problem to get rid of any kind of like whiteout or paint or anything like that. And if you're, especially if you're resizing a mineral, you know, a lot of times those numbers will end up somewhere visible rather than where they were.
I think that's a good point. I think the Elmer's glue is probably, because I mean we talked about it last time as far as like maybe keeping some minerals stabilized, you know, half Elmer, half water, different things like that. But yeah, that's probably the best way to go about doing that. And then of course the question is, like you said, resizing. Well, one of my biggest things that I used to ask was, and I didn't know this until I, you know, learned about the rock courier and his collection and his work with Mendat and these Lifesaver labels, was like, well, how in the hell do I put a Lifesaver label on something that's very small? And so the fix to that is something like this, where you maybe have a small piece of twine, you can put that on the label, on the specimen, and then you have that kind of Lifesaver label. And that's another way to do it. So you can use that Elmer's glue and then you do it this way, because that would actually reduce having to put some sort of sticker on top of a very small piece.
Right.
Which I like that method. I think it works really well, especially for some of the smaller pieces. But then again, you also say to yourself, when you get thumbnail or smaller, most of the time, if you're going to a serious collection, you're looking at them, those will already have labels on the thumbnail boxes themselves. But again, that could be misplaced, right? If you take it out. So this is the thing that I wanted to talk about earlier, which was a field collector's dilemma. And so the question that comes up is, like we said, what happens when you're collecting so many specimens at a fast rate? I mean, as field collectors, we end up doing that, right? People that are always going out locally and collecting lots of stuff. How do you high grade it? You know, what are you going to sell? What are you not going to sell? If you're like me, you don't want to sell anything. You just look at everything and say, oh, I love that little pebble over there. I can't get rid of that. So the field collector's dilemma is you always have all this stuff, and that leads to this sense of overwhelming pressure. And for Virginia, I've met with a lot of field collectors doing the Virginia Mineral Project stuff. And a lot of field collectors back in the days never labeled their specimens for that very same issue, for same reason, is because they just felt so overwhelmed because they were pulling so many resources, so many specimens in just a very short amount of time. One way that I do, and one thing that I always thought was very helpful, is creating stock labels for the localities I collect at typically. This is actually a Jane Owen label up at the top right, and you can see here that she just has it plain, so that way she can write out, you know, what specifically she found. Another thing that I've done is, if we talked about Chestnut Ridge last week. So if I'm going to Chestnut Ridge and I know that the majority of stuff found up there is quartz crystals, and I may have, you know, quartz crystals on matrix and the sandstone. Well, I can just make some stock labels and automatically be able to put those when I get back from the field with the specimens and high grade those out almost instantly, because I know I've seen that done sometimes where people already have like a apophyllite and prehnite from Centreville and, you know, stilbite from Centreville, and they're almost pre-made so that when you just go out in the field, you just put them together. And for a lot of field collectors, that's the issue, right? You're pulling so much stock, but they're pretty much all very similar minerals. They're not very different for one another. So that's a way that maybe you can get around that.
Yeah,
and then, oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, what we were doing when we were still selling in Tucson is that we literally would get business cards that the printer would print. Mm-hmm. And I would literally print out, like, you know, a set of halite, and I would have 50 labels, and then all I had to do was actually put the price on it and if there was any additional information, but they were all, I would just print them out from the printer.
Yeah, that's what.
It's a good idea just to have blank labels anyway.
Yeah.
In case, like in case you see a label is missing, you can jot down what the information is, and then at least you'll have a label or for that. So even if you find the label eventually or not.
Yeah, I used to. I would just keep all of it. And also a lot of times we lose things in the room and somebody will ask for a label and, you know, God forbid it's gotten separated. I'm able to pull something out and put it together quickly. So one thing I'm paranoid about is not letting people leave without a label.
Yeah.
Right.
Label.
And again, that's the repetitiveness, right? Getting into practice, maintaining persistence of getting used to this as a continual maintenance of your collection. You know, is this something that you are used to doing every time you go out and collect, making that good habits, I guess. But one thing that I see a lot with field collectors is, I don't want to tell you my spot, therefore we don't make labels. And there's a very famous, we talked about this last time, or in the Virginia Classics presentation, where we had a very famous collector up in Northern Virginia who at the time was doing a lot of collecting at the quarries. And he purposefully mislabeled specimens because he didn't want people to know where they came from. And he didn't realize that years later, those labels would be very prolific. People would always be looking for his specimens. And then no one could even figure out where in the heck those locations were, or which actual quarry the specimens came from. Because at the time, the field collector's mentality was, I can't tell people where it's at because right now that location's open. The moment that it closes, and now all these specimens are even more valuable, you know, so there's a lot of times that I see some labels that were not always had all the information there. I think that's been solved a lot when you have these cataloging systems, right? But for a lot of field collectors, they would mislabel. And so Northern Virginia, there's actually work to have a mineralogical record article on the entire concept of the Northern Virginia trap rock quarries and trying to properly identify them from this entire issue of mislabeling for so many years, which was so fascinating. He labeled, but he didn't tell you correctly what they were. And then years later, his collection became so prolific that he never realized it would become a big issue, which is kind of a funny situation to be in.
And we've seen that happen a lot of times.
Well, in California, we ran it a lot of is people were at night, let's say, visiting other people's claims.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you know, they're going to mislabel it because they don't want, you know, hi, just, you know, have a label saying, here, I took this from your mind when you were looking, kind of deal. So,
Exactly. And I mean, that's the problem, right? I mean, and you know, you get, again, that is very frustrating, especially, you know, here we are and we see this as a common theme and a common topic about Northern Virginia quarries, and even on Mendat. I mean, when you look at Mendat, you know, you see all these Northern Virginia quarries and there's so much like which one's which and this and that and that. And it all kind of comes back to where did we get the information about these from? And it was this guy, because he was always out there doing the collecting. So, you know, that does come up sometimes and it's a big issue. And it's just something that is that dilemma of how do we handle that? So I want to show some pictures now, because we move away from that, but we can still talk about certain things. And this is actually really cool. This is a specimen that is part of the R.V. Dietrich collection. And we talk about R.V. Dietrich a lot because he is this inspiration for Virginia Minerals and Minerals of Virginia publication that pretty much every Virginia rock hound has. And this is a really cool specimen that I first saw in this 1960 article by R.V. Dietrich. And you can see the image up at the top right, top left. And I came back years later, ended up finding this at the Laura Robbins Gallery. The display label, of course, didn't say, you know, it was from the R.V. Dietrich collection, but we went back and pulled the files, but we were actually able to find this original label. All of that matched up with the original articles. And then you can see over here to the right that this is the official letter that R.V. Dietrich wrote to the Laura Robbins Gallery when he was donating this specimen. So you were able to put all those different pieces together and I'll add all that provenance up with this specimen that was actually put into a publication and to actually get a new photograph about 30 years later, or I guess 50 years in this case.
Cool.
This is, Alex, you may want to talk about, these are some of the museum labels that Alex has sent over. You can see the Carnegie Museum, American Museum, and the Smithsonian.
Yeah, these are just some, one of the things I like to collect is pieces with lots of provenance and like ex-museum pieces. And so these are just a few of the original museum labels from across the country that I have right now.
Is there anyone in this chat that collects solely label? I mean, actually has a sub collection of just labels? And then we always say we like those labels, but is anyone that actually goes out and collects just old labels?
I know.
I like collecting them with the specimens.
Yeah.
I know there are people who have collections of like orphaned labels, I mean, that's how the Mineralogical Record Label Archive was started. It was a collection of orphaned labels from various collectors. But there are people who do that.
I guess that's kind of a niche thing.
I think
I mean,
example of provenance of labels that I've seen has been with those old silver specimens from Norway. Sadly, those specimens are very, very pricey now, but I've seen specimens in Tucson with no less than a dozen labels behind them. It's like a stack, about a quarter of an inch thick of these labels going way, way back over 100 years. It's quite remarkable.
Actually, this is a fun story about the Smithsonian label and the Carnegie label there. The Carnegie label is incorrect. Rome is not in St. Lawrence County, which is why this piece was deaccessioned from the museum. They couldn't verify the locality. And then the Smithsonian piece, it's actually a malachite pseudo after azurite, not calcite.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that piece is from the mid 1860s.
Yeah.
It was one of the original finds from back then. And I mean, I can see why they thought it was calcite, but it's actually after azurite.
Very interesting. Yeah, and that's another thing we talk about, like with Virginia. I mean, you know, I don't see a lot of really old labels and labels from Virginia. I mean, the earliest label that I have is like 1950. But going back, you know, 1800s and stuff, it's very hard to find anything in late 1800s from Virginia, which would be cool to see some of those specimens if they're out there, which I'm sure they are. This is interesting. So medicine bottle label. This is actually from Richard Seaver, who found the largest spessartine garnet documented at the Rutherford No. 2 pegmatite, called the Amelia Queen, or the Rutherford Lady, depends on who you ask. And you know, I blurred out everything here, but there was a vial in a collection that I went to, and it was his medicine vial that he filled up with microlites and columbites and just stuffed them in there and had a little piece of paper in there, and that was his label.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of interesting to come back years later and look at that.
It's kind of fun though.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought, right? I mean, it's just one of those things. It's just one of those weird situations where, you know, is it a label? I say it is.
No, that's
right?
what
It's
had at the
documented.
time.
Yeah. And then there was a lady, and I'm forgetting her name right now, who also collected at Rutherford a lot, and her medicine bottle was there as well. I didn't have that picture on my phone. But again, it was just, you know, when I collect shark's teeth down at Myrtle Beach, I used to always take old medicine bottles, take off the label though, and just put my shark's teeth in there because it made a lot of sense. It was easy to carry around and it kept everything safe. It didn't just open up and fall out. So, you know, is it a label? Yeah, I'd say it's a label. So kind of interesting. This is some stuff from the George Reimer collection. You can see, again, here's his specific, very, very specific handwriting. And one thing that's interesting is this label right up here in the upper right is actually a specimen that I got from Lance Kearns at JMU. And it didn't have any information about who it came from or anything like that. But boy, I don't know about you all, but that looks a lot like George Reimer's handwriting.
Yeah.
So again, not only are your labels important, but sometimes for the people who actually had handwriting, you know, years later, you can actually match up some handwriting. So we asked the question, you know, is this typing and different things like that? Does that sometimes maybe lose some provenance because, you know, you're not actually writing those things down anymore, which is kind of a distinct way of doing stuff.
Also, I know a lot of people that, you know, they're worried about that going to the computer. So what they do is they'll pick a font that's a little bit more interesting and more distinctive. So you know that,
yeah,
font, that it's their label.
Yeah. But I just
Yeah,
that's
my opinion on handwriting is it's fine as long as your handwriting is good, because I've had to transcribe labels, handwritten labels so many times, type it in the computer and I can't read it.
Yeah, that, and I used to do work in archives and trying to translate handwriting.
Yeah.
It's enough to drive you nuts.
Also, they're sitting there labeling a bunch of stuff. Like when we used to mine, you're labeling a whole bunch of stuff, and you start drinking beers, and by that 100th specimen, your handwriting is
Toast.
a little different than the first one. So,
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that's how you pass the time when you're labeling specimens.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, the handwriting, I was like, and by the way, that actually just happened not so long ago. And I was looking over at this piece and I said, wait a minute. But if it wasn't for me going out and photographing this collection and meeting and looking at all these different specimens, I would have never put two and one and one together. I mean, I wouldn't have known. So
There's
it was pretty
definitely
interesting.
enough between those that I would say you got to go up there.
Well, one thing was the way that he always rounded off things. He always had this very unique kind of swirl at the end of all his letters, which was very interesting, but just something that I thought was very interesting.
Well, ours are the same, things like that.
ours are, well, they're different also from his other letters.
This is some of Andy's labels, and of course I was helping Andy out. I always laugh at this one because Andy has a crap ton of labels, Andy. I could probably have 10 different types of labels, but hey, that's another thing, right? When we go through our collections, sometimes we change our labels up, and our labels are never the same as they were when we first started. So it's cool to kind of see that progression. Andy was actually telling me this one over here, this Trap Rock Minerals was a label specifically for when he was going out to the Nova quarries and collecting. So you could see here, it was designated to, this label is going to be my finds from these Northern Virginia quarries, which is kind of interesting. You see he has some sale labels here, which is the one down in the lower left. You also see at the upper right, which is his collection label. The one in the middle is also his collection label. And then down at the bottom right is actually a display label. So this is what he would have when he did the Richmond shows or different things like that, is what he would put on display. So lots of different labels for lots of different things, but it shows you his progression as a collector over time and as he focused on different things, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it is good.
Yeah, because we used to go mining, and so typically we'd tailor the labels specifically to, like when we did the fluorite, nice blue, green fluorite colored, text on the card, and even tailor the, for the mineral type, so that it's really obvious, like when your room has different mines in it, like, which pieces came from where, and people can tell immediately.
Another good reason to keep your labels, even if you do switch the style, is that your different types of labels can be used to date parts of your collection. So like if we have one of Andy's labels, like from the middle, we know that's a different time when he got that rock than if it was in the upper right.
Upper right hand, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and every time you make a new label, you introduce errors in, maybe you have misinformation in there. So I know for repositories and museums, it's generally a rule, don't ever throw away any kind of label, no matter how old or how eaten up by bugs they might be.
Yeah. That's what I was always taught too.
This is, and I apologize for Rudy if he's watching this at a later date or watching it now, is that I didn't have a lot of his labels, but this is some of Rudy Bland's labels, who's been very prolific in minerals in Virginia. I mean, you can't think of Virginia minerals without thinking about Rudy Bland. He's just always been involved in it. And over here to the left is one of his very, popular ones, which was easy to identify. You had a little crystal cluster and a shell and the mammoth there, which is kind of really cool. And of course, it was stuff from Northern Virginia, so from the collection of Rudy Bland. And then other ways that we would always designate Rudy Bland specimens was his cataloging number, which is another thing we kind of talk about here, is he would put B, then the number. And so here we see that with that B, we know it's a Bland mineral, which is kind of interesting. And he took that label, typed it up, or on typewriter, I guess at this time, and put a little red label behind it. So this is kind of interesting because we know when we see that B in front of some of these Virginia specimens that at one point it moved through the hands of Rudy Bland, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And of course, he owned a rock shop for a while. So he was selling stuff. He had a lot of material going out there from Virginia and everything. So, having these collection numbers and having his sale labels, it's really interesting to add all that information over, because you can see where this label was within his collection. And, I would assume, because Rudy has done so much with documenting things and doing stuff. I mean, he actually works at the State Survey helping with their collection. So I would assume he probably has a catalog with all this different information, which is really interesting to kind of go back and cross-reference that. David Limscomb, he owns the VA Rock Shop in Nelson County, and or I guess Faber, Virginia. And his labels are also very unique, very small. They're by almost 2x2s in some cases, or smaller than 2 inches. And you can see he has very specific font. He also puts his website on there, which I think is a reasonable thing to do. I think it's great marketing if you're selling your labels. Because if you think about it, years later, you may come back, or even if someone sold 2-3 years ago, you get this label and you can go back to this guy and say, hey, I saw you had some Virginia minerals. Do you have any more? So a kind of interesting thing here, but he has a lot of different labels. And then the one that's the second one from the left, the longer one, is what the Rock Courier also called a tombstone label, which, you know, half of it was folded up and went into the box, and the upper half stood out of the box. So you can see he was able to put that. He put the dates, he put reference numbers, if it was from someone's collection. So on the left side, you see Lynn Taylor from Richmond, Virginia, calcite crystals from the beach, from Virginia Beach. And we talked about those. So different labels, but all these, you know, he has that designation, so you know that these are his labels. And his rock shop is a great place to go, so I'm definitely giving him a shout out. I would definitely recommend going there. And then Buck Keller. Here's Buck Keller's mint green labels. And these are the labels that, if you see the back of them, you know it's a Northern Virginia specimen, probably. Most of what he did and what he collected was Northern Virginia. He did have stuff. Our Barger's Quarry Pyrite, or Barger's Quarry Pyrite, that is in the Friends of Mineralogy logo, is a Buck Keller specimen. So it was actually drawn from one of his pieces personally, and he had these mint green labels. But very key design for Buck Keller. And if you see this, you automatically don't even have to look at the bottom to know it's a Buck Keller piece. And this is Buck Keller. He's since passed, but very prolific collector for Northern Virginia. Alan Pinnock. Alan Pinnock is also very important to what we know today with Virginia. I mean, he was part in the author for the Mineral Locality Index. He worked at the State Survey for many years. He was very well known with collectors. He went out in the field and collected. This is him over to the right, collecting at Barger's Quarry. And then you can see, which is rare to get a Alan Pinnock label, because Alan Pinnock did not label a lot of things. And before he passed away, I think he had dementia, he had some memory issues. And so a lot of his stuff, he didn't have these labels to. So it was nice to see, this was sent to me by Andy, an actual label from Alan Pinnock. And then over to the left, I bought this just for the fact that it came from Alan Pinnock. And I can verify that this specimen did come from him. So it was cool to see this from Alan Pinnock, so prolific with Virginia minerals. I don't know if Andy or anyone is in the chat still from Virginia. Do we know if Dr. Mitchell had labels, or if there's any labels with Dr. Mitchell, R.S. Mitchell from UVA?
Hey, Thomas,
Yeah.
Rudy would definitely know. I don't remember ever seeing any labels of his.
I've seen where it said from the collection of R.S. Mitchell, or a document saying something.
I've seen that, but not. I don't recall really seeing any labels though. I mean, you know, but Rudy would definitely know.
I'll have to ask him. Okay, and so here's just kind of a little collage here of some different labels. The one in the upper left is from the collection of Gus Carper, and this is kind of a sad story where Gus Carper was a big collector down in Southwest Virginia for many years, and I'm assuming he did some interaction with some of the clubs, but I guess he was more of an independent collector. As he got older, he started getting dementia and then eventually passed away. But he didn't put a lot of labels with his collection. There was actually only one location, which was his Willis Mountain specimens, that he had labels on. And unfortunately, when he passed, his wife wasn't sure of what to do with his collection. So she ended up giving it to a local thrift shop. And I always tell this story when I went and gave talks, because I saw it on Craigslist and it said rocks, want them gone. And I contacted this lady, which it could have been, you know, typical rocks. And I ended up going there. And in the back corner of this very dusty and rundown room was actually a beautiful collection of Virginia minerals. Some of them have been damaged in the process of just people putting them in boxes. But I found crystallized turquoise. I found beautiful hematite stalactites from Peter Mountain. And so we did a lot with this collection, but unfortunately, a lot of Gus's collection would have been thrown away and was almost sold off. And interestingly enough, someone was on Reddit, and I don't know how they found out, but they were on Reddit, and it was a young girl who was the granddaughter of Mr. Gus Carper. And she asked about her grandfather, and someone actually told her to reach out to me on Reddit. I don't know what chain it was on. And she reached out to me, and I was actually able to touch base with her and show her her grandfather's collection, because she likes minerals and she didn't know where it went. And his wife actually sold it off before they actually ever told them. So years later, I actually ended up showing her his granddaughter his specimens and gave her some of the labels.
That's cool.
Which is kind of a really cool story. Down in the lower left there, the fluoropophyllite is actually from sale at Virginia Tech. We also have in the middle there the muscovite from Mica Mine Farm, the Harris Mine from, oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget his name right now. Valley Rock Shop, John Hammer. And that's his labels that he uses. We also see that we have George Loud, who's done a lot of collecting or has a lot of labels and specimens from Virginia. Then we have some very different types of things. Andy sent me one from Franklin, New Jersey, some Franklin Mine specimens. We have a Barger's Quarry specimen up there in the top. Does anyone know that label? I don't know who that's from. Maybe
Nope.
not. Yeah, there's no information on that, which is unfortunate, but I've seen that label several times, but never been able to put a name to it. I like George Loud's labels because they're so unique. I mean, he has, you know, this, I guess, looks like to be a mine of some sort in the background. I don't know if anyone knows what that picture is actually showing there, but he always had a picture. They were very large labels, very distinct, had his name on it, said where he was from, the day he collected it, and, you know, those stand out a lot. They're very noticeable labels.
Hey, Thomas, this is Jim Dorn.
Yeah.
On the last, the top right, the Hardistonite from Franklin.
Mhm.
That's from, I think that's from Andy's partner, Grenier, wasn't it? Wasn't that his partner in the mineral
Yeah,
business?
this is Andy sent me this label, but I don't know if Andy's still in the chat. But yeah, he's there, but no, I think that's probably right then, if that's because he sent me that label.
Yeah, I think it was Gary Grenier, I think.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, well, probably because GG.
Yeah.
And then here's just a couple of different labels. Michael Papp submitted his label. He does a lot of micro minerals up in the middle top. Over to we have the a Reger collection, which is actually, we had that on our Virginia Minerals Facebook page the other day, where I was showing a stellarite specimen, and it was from the Reger collection. His collection was sold off at the Richmond Club Rock Swap about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and got a lot of cool stuff from his collection. The top right is actually interesting. It's a piece, it's just a rip of paper, but it's a DMME. It's from William Giannini, and it's some stuff that he was finding out in Charlotte County, and just some notes. But on the back side of it, it said the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. So it was kind of a specific, you know, field label. I don't know why they ripped it in half, but they did. But kind of an interesting little piece there. Scott Silsby, very unique handwriting. Hard to miss that there in the middle. Keith Williams, you can see that that's at Alan Pinnock Collection, Fancy Hill. That came actually from the same specimen that you saw, the Alan Pinnock's specimen label from Fancy Hill. I got this one just recently in the lower left corner, which was from W.J. Foster, which I had never heard of him before. And I don't know if anyone in here is familiar with him, but he must have done a lot of collecting down in Southwest Virginia, but very, very early label from 1951, which is kind of cool. We see some labels on the right over here. This was some from Andy, and then we see some other ones collected by George Loud. And then here's some other ones here. I mean, again, there's a lot of different types. I think this one's really interesting in the top middle. It was Gary Grenier. So, Jim, did he specifically collect Franklin, New Jersey stuff?
I don't know.
Because I think it's so interesting that he has here Franklin or Sterling.
Uh-huh. Right.
So he must have been focusing on fluorescent minerals, I guess, at some point.
Yeah.
Hey, Thomas,
Yes.
actually Gary was actually mined up there for 3 or 4 years as a miner in the mine.
Okay.
Yeah. And
cool.
yeah, so he collected a lot of specimens up there. He was very influential as far as working with the museum up there. And he had one of the largest fluorescent collections, Franklin and Sterling, around. I helped, unfortunately passed away. I had to sell it. And we had probably over 500 or 600 specimens, which we had in a room, and we had them all at night. We had them all on tables, and we turned out the lights, and you had this huge display. And the next day, all the collectors came in and purchased them. Pretty amazing. He was my business partner for about 12 years before he passed away.
Wow. Interesting. I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know that he had so he did specialize in that type of stuff in the fluorescent.
Initially he did, and then he ended up with a worldwide collection, and pretty huge collection, probably several thousand pieces.
Interesting. Wow.
Man.
We see, you know, some other specimen here, another one from Jane Owen, and showing her how she wrote the stuff. I guess, you know, here you see that has typed out a specific locality, but has written out what it is on the label. Over to the left side there is actually another document by Giannini when he was doing some field collecting. Found some really cool starlight crystals. They weren't anything to look at, only reference pieces, but just kind of cool to see the data as he's writing things down. And, you know, just kind of a piece of history in a way. Collector services for Maryland, Populi, Chantilly Quarry. A lot of people do use kind of the crystal morphology and the different diagrams on a lot of their labels. I'm not quite sure. Does anyone know what the Gary Grenier's label is trying to show up there in the top? I don't know. I guess it's something from the fluorescent minerals, because it seems to be similar to the one at the bottom, which is actually interesting.
Probably some fantasy mineral.
Thomas,
Yes.
is the collector services one on the upper left from Kensington, Maryland? I can't quite
Yes,
see.
Kensington.
Yes.
Kensington.
Huh. Just trying to figure out who that would be.
Again, this was some of the stuff that, you know, I was trying to use some of my labels, and Andy submitted some labels, and some other people submitted some labels. But most of these, you know, I got from, you know, previous collections, and that's just kind of that story, right? I don't know who this was, but I've seen this label several times. But I don't know what the relationship was with the Northern Virginia quarries.
That collection from Kensington was a fellow and his daughter. They had a shop for about 4 years, and they did mainly lapidary, but we would often sell specimens to him, and he would sell them to just any collector that came by. So it only existed for about 3 or 4 years.
It wasn't John McElroy, was it?
No, it wasn't him. It was a fairly large fellow and his daughter, and they only operated for 4 years.
But yeah, but I mean, that was a little bit about the labels and stuff. And I know that there's probably, again, we could go and show more and more and more and more labels. But does anyone have any labels that they brought or would like to show, or have anything else they want to talk about as far as about labeling that we missed?
I've got some labels. I showed you one of these earlier this week when you and I were talking. It's the Giannini, the Gertite from, you know, Dave Lipscomb's from his, I got it from Dave Lipscomb, but this is Bill Giannini's.
Up a little bit, over, back.
Yeah.
There you go.
Keep there.
I don't know if you can make it out.
But still, hold your hand steady. Yep.
Okay.
Even-
And then this is another Rudy's.
Yeah, I like Rudy's labels.
Yeah, I do too. And here's one. I don't know where I got these. I might have gotten these like our swap, or they're just generic. But I got a bunch of them. They're just very simple. And then we're talking about the what you mount your specimens on. And I showed you this earlier this week too, Thomas, from Betsy Martin. She's the I'm with the Richmond General Mineral Society here in Richmond, and our historian Betsy Martin was a very good collector for a while, and she's done a lot of papers with Lance Kearns on the Moorfield mineralogy in Amelia. But she told me one time, I went over there, and she goes, I said I need to have a base for like miniatures. I started getting into miniatures. She goes, oh yeah, this is what I use.
Back it out a little.
It's
Little.
2-inch square, unglazed tile. You buy it at Home Depot, Lowe's, and they're stuck together like in a strip. There's like 6 or 7 of them in a strip, and you do with like a rubber type stuff. You could just like break it in between them and just peel the rubber off the back of the tile. And then it's a really nice, because it's great because it's white and it's unglazed, and it shows a lot of your miniatures very well against the white background.
Those, just a comment too, those also, they make them in just glass. So a much cheaper alternative to the acrylic stands is the little glass squares that you can get as well for bathrooms and whatnot.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking a lot about the Mineralogical Records website, and they have a database and a catalog with a lot of old mineral labels and collections, and I definitely would highly recommend checking that out. But if we have some time and people are interested, we'll just go through and just show you that real quick, and just kind of that way you can go look at it at a later date, because I think it's very interesting for people to check out.
Yeah. I'll send the mineralogical label website in the chat, but then I can also share my screen just to show it right now. So this is the this has been mentioned a couple times in the talk already, and this is the one I mentioned when I said this was how this was started, from a collection of just random orphaned labels. But you go to that link that I sent in the chat, and you can just select a biography, and there's just hundreds of people here. And so you can just go through and click a random name, and you'll get their bio here. You'll get images of their labels. So it's a really great resource. Yeah.
I was going to say, how does one get into this database? Because, even though there's hundreds there's thousands and thousands of collectors. So are these people that have published in the Mineralogical Record and had their collection published, or what has made these people's specimens and labels get into this?
That is a great question that I don't know.
Sorry.
I have no idea why people get entered, how people get entered. So yeah, but you can just go into like a rabbit hole here and just click on random names and read about people and see their labels, see how they did it. So
That's really neat.
It's just really neat to look through every once in a while.
Can I chime in on this?
Yes.
Okay. I want to give some information of how things get in on the mineral label setup on the Min record. If there are if anybody, for example, finds that has a bunch of labels and finds that the specimens from this collector has shown up in different markets in different places, what that person would do would write up the guy's biography, find a picture of the guy, and pictures of the labels and send them to Wendell.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because, and also if you see any entries there and you actually have a lot more information or more labels or a picture of the guy, you send them to Wendell too. So for example, the label you're looking at right now has no picture of the guy. So if someone had a picture of this person, you would just send it to Wendell.
Right, and the contact information is down here at the bottom on every single page. So if you have information, then you can send that in.
Okay, I'm gonna go, thank you. I'll go back and mute myself.
Thank you, Mark. We appreciate that, though. Yeah, this is definitely something I would highly recommend checking out because there's a great way of doing that. And I think it's just very interesting to learn about some of these people, some of these collections, and the way that it's transferred.
Yeah. And sometimes you get entries that don't really have anything, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, that's very.
Yeah, so it's a cool website.
And I'm sorry. I say I do know that, like with the Mineralogical Record and some of these magazines, they do a really good job at when they're photographing these specimens, they'll photograph the label and they'll like crop it out and put it right next to it, which I think is so cool. That's a great way to display some of these older labels that have all that, you know, handwriting and script and calligraphy. Is a great way to kind of showcase that. Really beautiful stuff. Is there anything? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's Jane. Hey,
Jane?
I would just like to say there's one other thing I occasionally put on a label. If a fellow collector has given me a piece, I will put on the label gift from or collected by to acknowledge the actual collector of the piece.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's another good thing to add.
I was gonna say is that was another thing that George Reimer did really well, is he would say gifted by someone on this date, or Christmas gift, or, you know, different things like that, which seems kind of funny at the time to put, but hey, years later, it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another personal preference. Like some people have it on their labels, some people have it in their catalog. But as long as you have the information somewhere, it's good to put down.
I noticed on the Dietrich label, the collector's name was on the bottom line of that label.
Yeah, Dr. Anna Jonas.
Yep.
And that's another thing, you know, that we were talking about, is like they fade over time, unfortunately. All right, so I have a question, and this is kind of coming back to, you know, our next time we talk about stuff like this with maintaining collections and maintenance. And I'm going to leave it up because I think it's be something that we can all talk about, of something we're interested in. What do you think, or what should we talk about maybe next time? What do you think is the logical step that we would like to take this kind of maintaining a collection discussion? Or what would you like to learn a little bit more about and kind of have a conversation about? We talked about mounting, we talked about stands. You know, is there any overwhelming opinion on cleaning minerals, different things like that?
Cleaning for me.
I would really like to know about different things that you can do during cleaning, and or chemicals that may harm certain specimens but be okay for others. Yeah, I think that's a really big thing for me.
I was going to say specimen prep because I like prep.
I think cleaning of minerals.
Yeah, trimming, prepping, air abrasion, you know, all kinds of things like that.
Maybe some tools that others use. Like I just found out about the upholstery cleaner gun, and I got one for myself for getting into like small nooks and crannies.
Yeah, those are really nice to use.
Those are great for everything.
Yeah, I was about to say though, the biggest problem of those is, where do you find one that doesn't break within 1 week?
I've got one that's fantastic.
Oh, you do?
Dave
You have to let us know.
Callahan has one. Yeah, it's so you don't go in and put in upholstery cleaning, you put in textile cleaning.
Yeah,
and I got one off of Amazon. I believe it's an Arrow, and it's been absolutely fantastic. And then Dave Callahan, who's had one for quite a number of years, still using the same one. So he says the only thing he's had to do is replace the tips on it.
Yeah. Well, Alex and I, we used to always have to work on ours. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Alex has his there. There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
It's faded. I don't know what the company is.
Also, too, with the spray guns, if you get a good one, if the piece inside that determines where the spray goes. I used to take Wagner's paint guns, but what I did was I had the springy thing from a better spray gun, and I would put that into the Wagner gun. The Wagner guns last forever, and as long as it had the little springy thing inside of it. On a paint gun, it's 3 holes that are angled, but on a specimen gun or a upholstery gun, it's 1 hole straight through. And if you take that piece and put it into like a Wagner paint gun, the Wagner gun will operate just like a textile gun. And yeah, and it's a cheap way to go because they're like maybe $15, $20.
We're mine in England, we do a whole summer of digging, clean tons of material with just the same 3 guns for the whole season, and it did last 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty daggone good.
And you do the same thing, you'd have to replace the tips.
Interesting. Yeah,
that is good. This piece of garbage I think was $80 if I remember right.
Well, if you look inside of it, there should be like a little spring with a plastic with a little bit of a tail, and it'll have a hole going straight through it. And we took that out of this really expensive Italian gun that Cal and those guys came up with. And I just took that one piece and put it into a Wagner paint gun, and that was it. We didn't do anything else after that. It worked better than the spray gun that we'd gotten. So
that's where the magic happens.
Yep.
I'll say this is because we have a pretty core group of people who come and want to come and do these things. So if there's a specific thing that you really are interested in, or that you have a lot of knowledge about, or that you would like to talk about for this next presentation, because probably what I'll end up doing is, because I'm going to be going to graduate school coming, next week. So if there's people that would be interested in taking up a slide or having a specific thing to talk about, I mean, you can create one, send it to me, and we can put it in, but it would be something cool for us to share those best practices. So just think about that. If there's something that maybe you have something you want to include or something you want to focus on, please email me. But I think we have an overwhelming idea that next time we want to talk about the cleaning and the preparation of mineral specimens and the different types of things, because we can go deep into that, but I think we can do enough where it's not too deep to go too wild with it. But probably for that, I'll try to get at Andy's house, because I would like to be able to do a display of some of the different tools that we have. So, because all the different trimming saws and different things like that. Andy has like a 26-inch that used to be at Moorfield Mine, actually, interestingly enough. So different things like that. So yeah. But all right. Well, I mean, if there's anything else, I mean, does anyone have anything that they want to share, anything like that? I mean, is there anything that we left out of the labels that people just feel like we need to talk about that?
Make labels for your collection. It's better to start now than in 5 years.
Yeah.
It might be a lot of work right now, but imagine how much work it'll be years from now.
Yeah. And it'll be worth it to do it now rather than later.
Of course, old people like us who waited were like, well, if we handwritten all those, it'd take us years, but now that we have the computer, we can type it in and
well, I would
so much nicer now that because I mean, I love the handwritten labels, but when you've got several thousand pieces that you need to get into the system, it's really nice having that computer.
Yes, like especially if you can make labels like mine here. I was able to work with my friend Matt and make these, and I have like 200 something like that, which isn't a whole lot, but it would take a lot more time to write out 200 labels, and we just data merged everything and it filled in all 200 in like 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and again, I can't do all the different videos on all the different things, but I would say that it would be something that maybe as Friends of Mineralogy Virginia, and I know this is the Virginia Mineral Project stuff, but it would be interesting to share some of these techniques, because I think the more accessible it is, and once you get over that hurdle of getting your catalog created and having that technique set into place, I think it's very easy to maintain sometimes. It's still difficult, but I think it's just getting the catalog, learning that technique. And I would still say that Google Sheets, you know, is probably the best way because it's free. You can make an account. And for those of us that are involved in minerals, it's always better to have an account, you know, that is not related to everything else in our life. So that way I always have a Gmail for just the rock stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, Matt says the hardest part is starting, and that's true. It is.
Yeah, that's the first step. That's always the thing. Okay, guys, thank you
All right,
very much.
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming here tonight, and thank you all for sharing some of your tips. And like I said, we will be working on trying to get that. So if you have any suggestions or anything like that, let me know, and we will probably have that later in September.
Also, if you have any questions about cataloging or Google Sheets,
Yes.
Feel free to reach out to me. I'm the vice president of the Friends of Mineralogy Virginia, so if you search it up, you can find my contact info. I'll try to help if I can.
Thank you.
Yeah, we all have to help and be a team in this. I think that's the best thing. All righty. Well, I will see you all next time. Take care, and everyone have a great week.
Take care.
Thank you.
Do they meet once a week or once?